Hello and welcome to an occasional podcast produced by Schweitzer Church. I'm your host, Jason Leininger, and this podcast is called Theology in Public Life. In this occasional series of conversations, it's our aim to have a discussion that brings theology and the life of faith into the applied space of public life or the civic arena. One of the areas that Jesus talked about on a frequent basis was our relationship to our neighbors. In the scriptures, we're called to love our neighbors, to care for them, to welcome even the unknown neighbor. Today's conversation is going to take place with Noah Rothman. Now, Noah writes and comments on current events with a connection to National Review magazine. I became aware of Noah by listening to the National Review podcast, and he often talks about political events. But what caught my attention was the amount of time that he would describe his interactions with his neighbors, even to the point of taking a vacation with almost 40 of his neighbors. My mind was piqued. I had to know why. What brought him to this place? So in this conversation, we're going to have a conversation that centers around neighboring. And I'm going to ask Noah, what's behind it for him? What does it involve? And what are the fruits that he gets to experience because of this deep connection to his neighbors and this intentional outreach that he has? So thanks for joining us today. I invite you to join this conversation with Noah Rothman on neighboring. Welcome, Noah, to this conversation, and we're glad you're here to talk about neighboring today. I wondered if you could give us just a little brief introduction to who you are for folks that don't know who you are and or who know just a little bit about you.
Sure. Well, if you don't know who I am, you have probably a much healthier relationship with politics and news than I do. I'm a senior writer for National Review. Have been since 2023. Previously, I was an editor for Commentary Magazine. Before that, Hot Air, Mediaite, Campaigns and Elections, Ology, bunch of publications. And prior to that, I was in New York City radio as a producer. So I've spent the better part of my professional life in and around the business of politics as media, as entertainment, not in the elections game, but covering politics, not necessarily as a reporter, but as a commentator.
Yeah, so that's that's the place where I found you and started listening to you, was in listening to National Review online to the podcast. And one of the things that I've heard about you and Rich Lowry, I guess, is he your boss? Is that what
He is my boss, yes.
Yeah, he introduces you as the good neighbor, and then on many episodes, he'll ask you near the end of the episode, like, give us an update on your sense of neighboring. Mm-hmm. And so that's always been a key interest as I listen to that podcast. And a couple things you've talked about recently. One was about like going to a high school football game. You said one of your neighborhood friends was playing. Your kids aren't old enough, but you all went anyway. And you described that, I think, as like a peak pinnacle American moment.
Yes.
Which was really delightful. And then the other event that you talked about over the summer was you took a summer vacation trip with like 30 of your neighbors, or maybe it was even more than that.
Yeah, it was a little more than that. At our peak, we were about 39, including children, 39 people from my little neighborhood that took over a cul-de-sac in the Outer Banks in North Carolina.
What provoked you to take 39 neighbors and go on summer vacation together? What was the impetus for that?
Well, it wasn't my idea. In fact, the stars kind of aligned and allowed all of us to schedule that. It's kind of difficult to foresee that ever happening again, just by virtue of our dynamic schedules and how busy they are, especially with kids in our age range. Just for reference, my kids are 9 and 11, and most of the neighborhood that we hang out with are generally in that range, let's say 6, 7 to 13, 14, 15. So we all just kind of find ourselves in the same stage of life. So there's a fair amount of serendipity involved in this as well, but there's also a fair amount of intentionality. So my story when it comes to neighboring, such as it is, if that's a verb, it began in pretty much during the pandemic. So in 2016, my wife and I moved out to our first house, starter home, and it was small, about 1,900 square feet. and only a footprint of about 700 square feet. So it's not something you can put a lot of people in. And we had some friends in our neighborhood, and they had bigger houses, and they would host us. And we developed this real sense of guilt for just being unable to reciprocate. We would have people over, but our property did not allow us to do that at scale. And we had resolved to pay it back when we had the opportunity. And the pandemic came, and we were suffocating in our house like so many were. And we resolved to do what we could with the money that we had and try to find a bigger property. And we did. And when we moved out there, we just struck gold. We were surrounded in my little area. It's not quite a cul-de-sac. There are a couple other roads on this hill, but we'll call it just a hill. And there were 4, 5, 6 families, roughly with the same age range children, whose company we did not dislike. And my wife had been driving the kids to and from that school that summer to allow them to integrate into the school before we actually moved into our house. So she was busily making acquaintances with the people that she could. And when we moved, within, I think, about 3 days of getting the keys to the house, she had a birthday party for my oldest and youngest. We have a joint birthday party for them because they're both born in the month of September, at the beginning and the end of September. So right in the middle, it makes perfect sense just to have a joint birthday party. Yeah. And we probably had 30, 40 people at that event, which is a great little get together. But we went really wild over the course of the first year or two. We had a 70th birthday party for my mother-in-law with about 70, 80 people. We had a Memorial Day party with about another 50 people or so, also including children. A 4th of July event, a Halloween event. And then we hosted our families for Christmas and Thanksgiving. And a lot of this, we still have some of these attachments vestigially. But we've since scaled back the partying a little bit. But we still have at least 1 or 2 big events like that over the course of the year. And I found myself writing an essay about this in January of this year in response to something that came up in The Atlantic via Ellen Cushing, who's a writer for The Atlantic, who says, America is starved for parties, she writes. Because everybody wants these parties, but no one knows where to find them. No one knows where to get them. No one knows how to enjoy this sort of thing. And she cited survey data and anecdotal evidence to support that sort of thing. And I responded that, I have some insight into this, and it's not as though these things fall into your lap. It is something that you have to do, something you have to work toward. And creating that environment, we didn't necessarily create it in my neighborhood. It was there, but we integrated ourselves into it and then subsequently kind of commandeered it and maneuvered it in ways that were advantageous to our social life and, frankly, I believe, to those around us. So it took on an organic life of its own, but it didn't start organically. Not for us. You had to really work at it and ingratiate yourself. And there are upsides and downsides. The cost of hosting people is not trivial. There's Ellen Cushing's essay indicated that, if you do this and your friends do this and you reciprocate properly and everybody pays, then you can find yourself having like 20 or 30 invitations to these big house parties a year. And to that, I would say, well, that's probably not ideal, because that would begin to feel like an obligation more than anything else. And, these sort of events that you have, you don't really have to do that because they beget other events that aren't necessarily at your house. Especially in the winter months, it becomes prohibitive cleaning wise to host that many people. So, you have what follows from that are the sort of things that are organic, like dinner parties out, or impromptu driveway confabs, or garage nights with the dudes, or just going out with kids. That's the sort of thing that results from that sort of social setting. It's not that the reward for house parties is more house parties. The reward for those events is intimacy, and and a social, a little social platoon that eventually becomes something like a friend, or even a very close friend. And that's what the process that we established resulted in. But we do have, those sort of the aesthetics of those like crazy events that just come together, like our trip to North Carolina with almost 40 people and Halloweens where you have probably 30 to 50 kids and all their adults, just double it by all the adults, wandering around this neighborhood, and it starts to feel like, if you're a millennial who remembers the analog age, it starts to feel like an 80s movie. And people get very jealous of this when I show them pictures or tell them about it. Like, how does this happen for you? What miracle made this happen? And my wife, first of all, if you want to talk about miracles, but second is just industry and intentionality. It really was a conscious choice to create this social environment.
What was the propellant behind the conscious choice? What brought you to this place where it's like, that is a value that we want to have in our lives? And so it's like that propellant began to give you the impetus to extend yourself.
That's a good question. First, the social impulse, which is, just the elementary instinctual impulse of human beings to associate in tribes. That's part of it. The second is jealousy, I imagine, with my neighbors who had lovely big houses and would host lovely big parties of which we'd be a part of and say, gosh, I wish we could do that as well. And the third is gratitude for those opportunities and the desire to pay it back to those who were so generous, and to pay it forward to those who we would like to be, who we wanted to be a part of their lives, and who we expect would create those same conditions for their friends in their lives, and recreate the kind of breakdown, at least rather, the atomization that's incentivized by the digital age and social media in particular, and all the negative emotions that are associated with that facsimile of social life, of tribal solidarity and affinities, and create something real out of them. So there was a mixture of emotions there, some more noble than others, I would imagine, but all of them contributed to that impulse.
So coming out of those experiences, how has that shaped or spoken into a sense of maybe a theological reflection or an anthropological reflection? As you continue to move along in that and you engage your neighbors, what have you seen, or what have you, reflexively, what have you learned out of that? Or what have you taken away from it?
Well, I don't know if I can speak to in theological terms where that comes from or what lessons I've drawn from it. It is certainly spiritually satisfying and gratifying, and the connection between individuals on a level that is more than cosmetic is fulfilling in ways that I think you could probably say were certainly spiritual. I would say that. Where lessons I have taken from it, I would say the lessons I have taken, at least the lesson that I've taken from the actual hosting of these events that begat the social relationships that we have now. I should digress. We're pulling back a little bit from the big giant to-dos that we had at the outset of this thing. There was an element of sort of open enrollment to it. Like if you're an insurance company, you have like a few months where you're, listen, we're taking on all comers, and then eventually open enrollment closes. You say, okay, well we've pretty much got the risk pool that we need here. So there is that. We're no longer, at least this year we took off from trying to host these big events. Next year I think we'll get back to it, but not at the scale that we started with at the outset of this. So there was an element of tactics in that as well, and a strategic approach to developing community relationships with our neighbors and our friends, and translating that into something more durable. So which isn't to say that those relationships don't persist; they do. But we've just taken a step back so that we no longer have to spend the money that we had to spend initially and clean the way we had to clean initially. Which isn't to say we don't like doing it; we do. But you got to take some breathers every now and then. The lessons that I say I would take from it, I would say that there's probably some people who would say that I wouldn't want to do that sort of thing. I would be pleased to be invited to that sort of thing, go to that sort of thing, but I wouldn't want to commit myself in that way because it's too expensive. It's too much of a time commitment. And the the nostalgic ideal that you think you're searching for. I mean, there are some people who would probably tell themselves that the pursuit of this nostalgic ideal, this 1980s environment in the analog world that you're trying to recreate, is gone forever, and it's a fool's errand to really succumb to nostalgia, because your rose-colored imagination, rose-colored reflections on your own childhood are always faulty. So you'd probably end up finding that you've committed yourself to a course of action that's only going to depress you when you can't actually recreate the conditions you're seeking. And I would say that's faulty in a lot of ways, in particular the nostalgia of it, because you can trigger a lot of those reflections, but you're never going to create a perfect facsimile of what you remember from your childhood. You'll create new memories. You'll create new nostalgia. And I would also say that none of this would happen without children. Mm-hmm. If you're a childless adult, it is probably far more difficult to have the kind of conditions that we created for ourselves, in part because your company wouldn't enjoy them as much as ours do. Because it's much lower impact for children, right? They don't really need a whole lot of stimuli to be happy. They just need a good environment, a safe environment, and one where you're comfortable establishing this free range zone where children can kind of perambulate their neighborhood on their own, in conditions you believe to be safe. And that's the sort of thing that I think probably was the impetus primarily for our approach. But that's not to say it's impossible. There would be a different kind of scenario for you if you were a childless adult trying to create these big party conditions, or a big social circle with concentric orbits, individuals in and out of that social circle. It would just probably be different settings and probably more expensive settings. Nevertheless, it can be done. It just requires some commitment on your end and some willingness to experience discomfort. You do have to. The only way to create these lasting friendships is to be vulnerable to a certain degree, to open yourself up in ways that a lot of people find very discomforting. And yes, there's a huge vulnerability to letting these people into your lives, into your homes. But it's quite rewarding on the other end of it. So, yeah, I don't know. Probably a lot of people would shy away at that discomfort, especially if they live their lives on screens, which is, the lowest impact possible, the least ventured in that bet that you're making. So I would say there's a level of risk that's probably intimidating to some, but the reward for that risk is certainly a return on investment that makes it all worth it.
So one of the things that I've been wondering about, because we mentioned at the top, and you mentioned at the top, that you're politically active. I mean, you write about politics, think about politics, talk about politics. And so sometimes when neighbors get together, when you get into those close proximity kinds of relationships, you talk about all kinds of different things. How does politics play a role within the conversations with the people you gather with?
Well, I wouldn't say it plays no role. There's a mixture of views in our company. For the most part, in the particular enclave I live in now, it's more reddish than blue. In the enclave that I was in previously, it was more blue than red. I would say it doesn't really matter, save for the degree to which it's a conversation topic. I mean, things always get a little bit more heated in presidential years. But other than that, it is immaterial to these relationships. It just doesn't come up. When it comes up, it is an amusement, a distraction. It is not an existential fight, certainly. So the compartmentalization of politics as a one facet of modern life is probably quite useful. If we were to elevate the minutia of politics, first of all, a lot of the people around me don't work in my field, or any political field. They work with their hands, their vocation, they're in vocations. They sell insurance. They work with electronics or mechanics. So make a good living doing that, but not in my industry or in a knowledge industry generally. So the degree to which politics looms large in their lives is probably a function of how close we are to an election day, and that's pretty usually quite rare. So it just isn't quite a factor for me. If it was a factor, I think it would be a negative one. So I'm quite happy that politics generally comes up as a curiosity or something that Noah does, in his day to day, and let's see what he's up to this afternoon. But that's the extent of it.
That's pretty incredible, because I mean, one of the facets that I've picked up on from time to time is, people talking about how, well, they don't talk to that family member anymore. They don't talk to that neighbor anymore because maybe the yard sign that went into their, in the midst of an election cycle, or
Yeah.
so it's really commendable that you can like keep the political conversation in such a way that your relationships within your neighborhood are robust.
Well, it didn't used to be this way. Something that I wrote about in my last book is, and I blame Congress for a lot of this, and I'll tell you why. One of the reasons why I feel like we've come to a place where politics is, for so many, indistinct from their own sense of self, from their very identities, is the extent to which we have politicized that which is perhaps political, but is not politics. Politics is understood as the election outcomes, legislative initiatives, state, local, and federal regulatory initiatives, the sort of thing that can be changed and shaped by political processes in a country with limited government defined by the Constitution, or in state level constitutions, which is very narrow parameters. And in a country with an active Congress, we would have a venue in which to channel those passions and focus politics on what it is properly understood as. Politics is not the food you eat. It is not the clothes you wear. It is not the movies you watch or the television shows you like or the commercials that interrupt them. And yet that's what we talk about consistently. So often when you have individuals who are attempting to monetize the culture wars and draft you and I into them. That's not politics. And it's intractable politically. There are no mechanisms in our government that can address them. It's not designed that way. In fact, it's prohibited from doing so. So we have these intractable dramas that consume our lives that cannot be remedied or resolved by political conflict. It's just a source of tension. And that tension benefits a lot of people who monetize it, who establish and secure for themselves power on the back of it. But it's profoundly deleterious to your own psychology, and it does absolutely nothing for you if you're trying to establish a broader, social network that includes individuals who might not think exactly the way you think, which, by the way, is probably every large social network. So, I find it easier to compartmentalize politics, in part perhaps because my identity is not derived as a result of that, even though I'm very close to politics. It is my day job. And it would be the same thing for my neighbors to be so deeply invested in the passions of Votech that if I were to criticize spot welding, that would be the end of our relationship. It's like it's inconceivable when you put it in those terms, right? But the same thing applies to me. Like if you were to try, have a really firm opinion about marginal tax rates, and I was to cut off our relationships on the back of it, you'd be very confused as to what the real casus belli was there.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for that that discourse on that. That's fantastic. Back to your summer trip. I'd like to go there for just a couple minutes.
Sure.
What as you guys gathered, almost 40 of you, what were some of your big moments, or your things that you think about often that happened in that time, that you just you cherish? You found maybe to say it was spiritually fulfilling.
It's spiritual fulfilling to be in that larger group. I don't really like crowds, larger crowds, especially individuals with no social connection who are moving as one, just taken up by the verve of the moment. That's the concert to me is relatively indistinguishable from the mob, save the amount of violence it's conducting, not capable of conducting, capable of. I think is profound and vast. But I do like associations with larger associations with individuals who you know and who you have a personal connection with. And that was about, closing in on the limits of my comfort zone. 100 is about the limits of my comfort zone, including children. But because beyond that, you have a tenuous connection with them, most likely, unless you're a very social kind of person. There were a couple of moments from that event that I found were really gratifying. There was we organized a white party on the beach for picture purposes, and just pop a few bottles and play some music and pass them around, which was fun. My watching my oldest boy integrate himself with some of the girls on the trip. Most of the friend group that we have are women, and they are like family to us and to them. But there was some extended friends around who are not in that family group and are therefore fair game. And watching him flirt for the first time was very enjoyable. He's just getting his feet wet, but it was fun to watch. And just our capacity. And again, there's an element of luck here. I don't know if my circumstances are replicable, but the degree to which, you spend that level of time, a full week in the same house with these people who we've known them for 2-3 years, but we've never lived together. And there's a level of intimacy there that can be, you step on each other's toes. And that did not happen. We did not experience any of that. There's a level of compatibility that is probably hard to replicate, because I think there's just luck there, but it's not entirely luck. There's an element of industry to it to have created those conditions. There's the central, circle of very close friends in this neighborhood relationship. But as I said earlier, there's concentric orbits that expand out to the broader universe of this friend group, which can get quite large when you start, counting all the various planetoids and Kuiper belt objects in this sequence. So there were many, many gratifying moments and some humiliating moments, which I'll keep off the air, but growing pains for my children. They were experiences that help ground you, help you grow up. I mean, the formative moments that you look back on as core memories. And that's so heartening for me to think that my children will have that to look back on. It's going to be very helpful for them growing up to have avoided a lot of the pitfalls that we obsess about in the social media age, disaggregation and a lack of connection to community and not understanding how to integrate yourself into groups or how to approach somebody or speak to them on an empathetic level. All that stuff, I don't think are problems my children are going to have to worry about. And I'm really grateful for that.
Yeah, I think you're doing a great job raising your kids in that way. And they're going to rise up someday and call you, say that their lives, their kids, their childhood was blessed. And
someday, I think. I'm not sure how they're going to rebel, though. They might rebel by just, sitting in their dorm room and staring into an iPad screen just to spite me.
I doubt it. I doubt that. I think they're going to bless you. I want to thank you for your time today. And
thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks for sharing with us in this way and for contributing to our thoughts around living in the public sphere with a sense of intentionality and purpose and how we can contribute in all kinds of ways. So thanks so much for that.
It's my pleasure.
Again, thank you to Noah Rothman for joining us today and leading and sharing in this conversation. We hope this discussion helps you consider how you live intentionally in the civic arena and how your spiritual life bears fruit with those who are around you. You can help us out by liking, sharing, and subscribing to this podcast. This podcast is produced by Schweitzer Church. Taylor Likes is our executive producer and editor, And I'm your host, Jason Leininger. We look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye-bye.